Good morning and welcome to this edition of Eurofound Talks. Today we're going to talk green jobs, but we're going to be talking about green jobs in the context of so much else that's going on in the European agenda. We have competitiveness and the drive towards greater European competitiveness, which is very much on the agenda. There's a push for good quality jobs with the roadmap and the act underway for the end of the year. And we're also looking at anti-poverty strategy, very much in the ether in discussions at European level. Now, why are all of these things interesting for green jobs, you might ask? Well, indeed, this is something we will discuss today and explore a little bit further, I hope. Because really what we want to talk about is green jobs. And of course, as part of the European Green Deal, green jobs are seen as a fundamental part of this. It's critical that we have good green jobs and the development of them to ensure that we reach the 2050 climate neutrality target. And we see this as a major opportunity. It's a good opportunity to create new, good quality jobs, millions of them across the European Union, in key sectors, some of them like tech, of course, but clean energy, construction, and indeed the circular economy. But we will be looking at what kind of jobs are these green jobs. It's not entirely clear when we have this conversation what we define as being a green job per se. Are they good quality jobs? Are they actually lower quality jobs? Who occupies those jobs? We want to make sure that that these new jobs are actually a fundamental part of the way we grow and grow better. That what we do ensures that there's greater growth, but there's also a just transition. And of course, the Just Transition Mechanism and the Just Transition Fund, which were set up to accompany the European Green Deal, are about supporting the most vulnerable, to ensure that the changes that are made in terms of the sectoral changes and the jobs are actually not having the negative effects on regions and on those who are most disadvantaged. We want to look also at the European Social Climate Fund, which was created to alleviate the social and economic impacts from new EU emissions as part of the trading system. So the overall goal clearly is to create new jobs. We want green jobs, we want clean jobs, but they are also supposed to be good quality jobs. How can we ensure that that's aligned with our other objectives, which are part of the European Pillar of Social Rights, for example, where we really do want to ensure that we have fair wages, good working conditions, decent working conditions for all, and ultimately, as we all agree as part of the sustainable goals, that we do not leave people behind as part of this process. But is this attainable? I suppose green jobs for the future of Europe, yes, but do we need to think about them in a different context now that we are in this increasing drive towards greater competitiveness and more productivity? So, no small questions for our guests today who are going to join us to discuss that. These are the experts in this area. And I'm joined today by Jorge Cabrita, who is one of our senior research managers, who is an expert on many things, but particularly today he's going to be contributing on working conditions and on green jobs. And I'm delighted also to be joined by Martina Bisello, who is a former colleague here working at Eurofound, but is now with the European Environment Agency, and she is also working in this area. So a very big welcome to you both.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Good. So let's just get into it straight away, Martina. There has, as I've said before, always been this kind of discussion around about green jobs. You know, what are they actually? Is it just sort of like a sort of a jargon that we use to talk about the Green Deal and those jobs that are associated? But can you really just give us an idea of what are these green jobs and what do they represent in terms of the European market?
Well, that's a $1 million question, Mary, but a very important one. So I'm very happy to start with that and reflect with you and with the audience about this important, but yet not yet a clearly defined concept. And the fact that the idea behind green jobs is not clearly defined. It makes it a little bit more difficult to quantify them, to characterize them, to understand them a little bit better, and also to compare across countries, to set targets. So it's really critical that we understand what these jobs are and how to measure them. And how do we measure them? Well, there are different approaches that we can take, and like every approach they have their pros and cons. Essentially, there are currently three main ways that one can look at green jobs to try to understand really what they are and to measure them. So one can look at sectors. So for instance, economic activities, which contribute on the one hand to protect the environment, let's say, for instance, protecting biodiversity or minimizing pollution and so on. And on the other hand, activities that can improve the management of our resources in a more efficient way, for instance, energy efficiency measures, but also production of renewable energy. So if we take this perspective, which is, for instance, the one that Eurostat takes with the indicator on employment in the environmental goods and service sector, we can see that there has been actually a growing employment in this sector in the last years. And in 2022, when the last available data is it's available, we had around 6.7 million people in the European Union employed in this sector. So it's growing, but it's still marginal if we put things into perspective compared to the overall employment in the EU. We're talking about the 3.4%, but it's important and it's important to highlight it. And particularly if we look a little bit closer at what type of jobs within this sector are created, it's really employment in renewable energy production, which has doubled, especially from 2021 to 2022, and the share of energy consumption, which is coming from renewable energy, in 2024 reached 25%, which was really high. So we're really improving in that sense, and there is some job creation associated to that. One can also look at green jobs from an occupational perspective. So look at the job profiles, like for instance, solar power plant operators, battery assemblers, onshore wind energy engineers, and then we can look how many of these people are employed, how many do we need, do we have enough? Yes or no? No, that's the short answer. Maybe we can come back to that, talking about the shortages later. And it's interesting because if we look at these job profiles, we look at concrete jobs and we can look at the skills that are associated to that. So better understand also the training needs for these jobs. We can look at the job tasks, so the activities that these workers carry out. We can see the extent to which they are green or not green. There's no black and white. There are different shades, and there is also a greening of the job profile. So what is green today might not be green tomorrow. Okay, and finally, to conclude, I think an interesting perspective is also looking at companies, because companies are greening in their practices, in their business models. They are becoming more sustainable, more circular. There's a transition towards circular economy. So one can look also at that perspective and then see how much employment there is in these companies that are greening their practices. So just it's a complex issue.
But three main categorizations there that you have, which help explain a little bit how at least we define those green jobs, which I think is important. I mean, I suppose it also allows us to be slightly more flexible in the way that we see how we measure those green jobs. And when you look at that measurement, I mean, are you able to see how important that green employment is to achieving the goals that we have, that I mentioned at the introduction about the 2050 climate neutral goal? I mean, are we actually seeing them having a positive impact? I mean, do the initiatives like the Competitive Compass and the Green Industrial Deal, are they actually showing a return on that kind of investment when it comes to meeting the target?
Well, I mean, if we look at the broader policy context, and you mentioned already the Competitiveness Compass and the Clean Industrial Deal, I mean, job quality creation and support to skills are seen as a key enabler for the green transition. So there's no doubt that this is an important pillar. The EU remains committed, firmly committed to achieving the Paris Agreement goals. We have seen it recently with the COP30 negotiation in Belém. It's challenging. It's difficult. That some important steps forward have been taken. More would have been probably better, but the commitment from the European Union is still there, and there's ambition of becoming the first world climate neutral continent, and we have a legally binding headline for 2040 of a 90% emission reduction. And in this context, it's basically green employment is one of the elements that turns climate ambition into social opportunity as well. So it's really seen in these key policy initiatives related to green industrial policy as a key enabler for a just transition to climate neutrality. But if you allow me, one important point also, which relates to the previous question of what is green employment and how the green transition and the transition to climate neutrality is affecting labor markets. I think it's very important not only to focus on green jobs, no matter how we define them, but to understand that there are really profound and structural transformations across all our sectors and production and consumption systems, which have repercussion on the way people work and who finds employment opportunity, what skills are needed. So it's really, really broad.
Of course, it's just one factor in the general drive towards this goal and the initiatives that are in place to try and achieve that. But I suppose if we're to focus just a little bit on the idea of quality jobs, and Eurofound has done an awful lot of work on that. I know EEA has also been carrying out some research in that area. But I think, Jorge, if we could just look a little bit about quality jobs and the Working Conditions Survey results, which we've just published recently, the first findings from that. Do we have an idea of whether these jobs are indeed quality jobs? I know we're going to look a little bit at the clean tech sector and specifically, but I mean, more generally, is the feeling that these green jobs are good quality jobs?
That's a very good question, Mary. So first of all, I would like to introduce the idea of job quality so that our listeners can understand what we are talking about here. So job quality is basically defined by those characteristics of work which have a proven causal relationship with workers' health and well-being, either in a positive or on a negative way. So it's everything which is part of our jobs, which basically impact negatively or positively in our health and well-being. And at Eurofound, we have developed this framework. It's been developed over decades. And in this development, we say that job quality can be characterized by 7 different dimensions. Of course, we have to talk about earnings, so pay, and I'm sure we will talk about this a little bit later. But we also include working time quality as one of the important elements. We also look at physical environment, which is about physical risks and physical demands that people have in any job. We include the dimension of social environment as well. And here we include things like social support from colleagues and managers, for instance, but also exposure to adverse social behavior. So things like bullying and harassment, etc., is also part of this dimension. And then, of course, we cannot forget career prospects. A 6th dimension is skills and discretion, very important. Martina already mentioned here the importance of skills and developing skills in the green transition. And this dimension of skills and discretion is about the capacity that workers have, the possibility workers have to apply the knowledge that they have and to develop that knowledge and those skills at work. And finally, a very important dimension as well is work intensity. So what we did basically is, and we are developing some work here with Martina and the colleagues at EEA, and we are looking at the job quality of specific sectors, subsectors, and some of the value chains which are part of these sectors in terms of the job quality and trying to compare these sectors. And because we started this work very recently, and just to give you a kind of a little bit of a flavor of what we hopefully will be able to achieve in the next few months. If we look, for instance, at the dimension of skills and discretion, that's where we find a greater dispersion of among the sectors that we are looking at. So we are looking at sectors of construction, manufacturing, operations, and research and development. So these are, let's say, the value chains that the colleagues of EEA are looking at in their research. And in skills and discretion, we can see that there's a big difference between research and development, for instance, in comparison with manufacturing. So people working in research and development sectors, they are more likely to report a better use of their skills and a better discretion and autonomy over the way that they do their work. So again, as Martina already said, this is not a black or white situation. Also, in terms of job quality, there are many jobs which are going to be affected by the green transition, which are very high quality, and we should try to aim of course, to aim those standards in terms of job quality. But at the same time, there's still a lot of jobs which will be necessary for the green transition. So if we think about some jobs in construction, for instance, carpenters, electricians, some of these kind of more simple occupations that will be required as well to help in the green transition. Some of these occupations have, on average, a lower job quality. So it's a mixed bag, and the objective would be to bring everybody together. Again, using your the very famous expression, we should not leave anyone behind, including on job quality.
And when we talk then specifically about the clean tech sector, for example, Jorge, maybe do you want to just say a few words on what we're looking at there in terms of that sector? Why is it so pivotal to the broader debate that we're having on green jobs?
I would say that question would be better addressed to Martina, because it's their project and they would have a better
Is looking at that
understanding
specifically. Okay.
Yeah, so it's this is a very nice example of cooperation between the two agencies, because we started this year to look at employment opportunities and just transition in the clean tech sector, and we're looking at technologies like wind energy, solar PV, batteries, and heat pumps. And there's a rationale behind the selection of these technologies, but essentially they're all really important to achieve the decarbonization ambitions. But they're also different among each other, and each technology has employment potential that is related to that, and it has also different characteristics when it comes to the profile of those jobs, like Jorge highlighted. And what it's interesting, maybe I can just anticipate very in general terms, key findings. What we can see is that in the last 15 years, employment in the clean tech sector has expanded considerably. But it's been mainly concentrated in some technologies and in some specific value chain segments, like, for instance, operations like maintenance, energy contracting, and sales or administration. So the manufacturing base has not been the strongest, especially in some technologies. There's been a lot of strong competition from China, as we know, especially when it comes to solar. Solar PV and batteries. And then if we look at where these jobs are created as well, so going back to the concept of just transition and not only the socioeconomic inequalities, but also the territorial inequalities. There's a huge variation also across member states. We have big member states like Germany clearly leading in the production of some technologies. There are other important regional clusters, but I think there's a very important geographical aspect to consider there. And then of course, when we look at workforce compositions, we have kind of the long-standing issues related to gender disparities, for instance. So we are replicating some of the gender inequalities that we see in other parts of the economy, with women representing less than 1/4 of employment in the clean tech sector. So a lot of food for thought.
That I wanted to come back on a little bit, Jorge, because when we have these discussions and we look at, labor shortages, for example, or we look at the development of good quality jobs, or, really we always have to look at the gender dimension in the sense that, is it actually facilitating gender equality, or are we seeing fall-offs? What is the situation when it comes to the just transition, or, the green transition here? Are we seeing it of benefit to women? Are there more women joining these sectors? What's the situation there?
So starting by the let's say a brief description of the situation at the moment, we can see that over the past years, gender segregation is pretty much part of the characterization of the labor market, no matter how we look at it, via sectors or via occupations. Most of these occupations, most of these sectors, most of these jobs are occupied by men. So those occupations and sectors likely to be affected by the green transition have been and probably will continue to be predominantly male. And by predominantly male, we are talking about 70% and more of each one of these groups that we can look at. So if we take the sectors of construction, manufacturing, energy, for instance, or even agriculture, we are talking about 70, 75%, 80% of the workers being male or more. And then apart from that, there's coming back to the issue of skills, there's also a skills bias. We know that these days, the share of women in tertiary education is much, it's greater than their counterparts. But at the same time, if we look at the skills which the green transition sectors are kind of tending to look at, we are talking about the so-called STEM areas, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and most of these areas are still predominantly also male. So without proper monitoring and promotion actually of women's participation in these fields of education in the first instance, and then in terms of participation in the employment in the green transition, we may exacerbate further the gender segregation than that we observe. And then there's a third element which is very important, which is pay. So gender pay gap, which is something which is pervasive across again our labor markets, unfortunately. If the green jobs tend to be better paid than average, for instance, and we don't see women being increasingly part of this transition, then we may also have an overall exacerbation of the gender pay gap via the green transition. So overall, and to finish this point a little bit on a positive note, I think we should take the green transition as an opportunity to effectively try to reverse some of the gender inequalities and segregation that we can see in the labor market, and which is pretty much the current situation in all the sectors involved in the green transition or even impacted by the climate change.
It's interesting because it's yet another one of the strategic initiatives at European level that this whole debate feeds into when we talk about the gender equality strategy and ensuring that we do close the employment, pay, and indeed pension and other gender gaps. But we've talked a little bit about the different areas that are covered here, gender being one of them, the type of jobs that they are. But in terms of the EEA, you've also done some work on the circular economy, and that's very present in kind of the transitional initiatives that are happening at the moment on the ground. Martina, can you give us an idea of what kind of impact is this having? What kind of growth potential does it have? What are you seeing in that area?
Yes, no, thank you for the question. We are doing a lot of work on the transition to a circular economy. Circularity is really a cornerstone, first of the European Green Deal, and then its importance has been later reiterated in the Clean Industrial Deal. So we really need to move from the linear take, make, dispose approach to a more circular way of thinking, of doing businesses and so on. So
yeah, because just to interrupt you very briefly there, I mean, we tend to do this in the Eurocrat circles. We talk about something, a phrase or an initiative, and the circular economy, essentially it's about reusing, recycling. It's very basic. It's old style stuff. It's what our generations before us would have done without thinking. Yeah,
exactly. It's about prioritizing resource efficiency, waste prevention, reusing, repairing, a lot of repairing, recycling. But there's also things related to remanufacturing as well. So the sustainable product design. So even thinking of at the beginning, like how we design products that can be then more sustainable, have a longer lifespan, and be better recycled. And there is there's clearly economic value in that, but there is also an employment potential in terms of job creation opportunities. So we have an indicator on employment in the circular economy specifically, and it shows that in 2023 there were 4.4 million people employed in the circular economy sector in the EU, and that was a 14% increase since 2010. So it's a considerable share of workers. Again, if we put things in the broader perspective, it's in terms of total employment, it's still small, but it's growing, and it's important. But we can see that most of the evidence now, again, it looks at aggregate job numbers, and we know that there's much more. It's very important, as Eurofound highlights, to look at that more qualitative aspects of job quality. So, I mean, jobs in the circular economy can really be of different nature and different educational profile and working condition. It can range from...
Because, Martina, that could also include, for example, reselling platforms, vintage stores. Okay. So it has a wide remit, really.
Exactly. So it can go from kind of the low-skilled manual waste management and recycling type of workers, and you have certain issues when it comes to working condition and informal work as well. It's a big problem in some parts of the circular economy. But then you can also go all the way to kind of more high-skilled professional workers in terms of a product designer or circular business model consultancy and so on. So there's a great variety, heterogeneity that I think we need to understand better, and that's what we're trying to do, to unpack it and emphasize also vulnerabilities within certain groups, especially those that engage in the informal circular economy or more kind of unpaid or community-based work.
And are these jobs included in our calculations on green jobs?
Well, once again, it really depends how you look at things. So there is one specific indicator for jobs in the circular economy. So, kind of waste management that would also feature in the environmental sector. But it really depends. It boils down when you look really at the specific then sectoral codes to understand what you're counting. So. There's the specific this one that I was referring to is really a specific indicator for the circular economy, and there's actually continuous improvement as well on the indicators. As we understand better actually what are the implications for the economy, then we can go back and revise our concept and measurement, and I think that's really important.
I mean, Jorge, we've talked here a little bit about the kind of jobs that are developing as part of this just transition, and moving towards sort of a green transition. Green jobs, yes, associated jobs, maybe circular economy, exactly. But can we have a little bit of a look also at how jobs themselves, which are not necessarily green jobs, are being impacted by the climatic changes which are causing us to have a green transition? I mean, we know that from our most recent survey, a working condition survey, we can see that there's an increase in exposure, for example, to heat, high levels of heat, temperatures. There must be other areas as well where we're seeing changes in the impact on actual workers and their jobs as a result of climate change. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Here I would like to make reference to a report that we published last year, which is the job quality side of climate change. In that report, we showed that, and we clearly demonstrated, according to the most recent research on the topic, that not only rising temperatures, but also more frequent extreme weather events, greater air pollution, these elements of climate change are already affecting workers directly and job quality as well. So you mentioned the episodic exposure to high temperatures. We can see that clearly through the data of the working conditions survey, that there's an increase there, which is possibly very likely a result of the climatic alterations. According to the most recent data that we collected last year, the Working Conditions Survey of 2024, we can see that 34% of men and 18% of women in Europe, they report being exposed to high temperatures for at least a quarter of the time. So 1/3 of men of the male workforce in Europe and almost 1/5 of the female workforce exposed to high temperatures. And here we are talking about 68% of workers in agriculture, for instance, no surprise there, I would say, but also more than half of workers in construction and 1/3 of the workers in manufacturing and transport. So again, we come back to the greening, some of these sectors being clearly also part of the green transformation, but also directly impacted by the climate change. So here, what is important to note is that there's obviously direct effect in terms of increased health risks. So dehydration, heat stroke, additional stress, these are all part of the package, let's say, of being exposed to these elements, and that will obviously then lead to productivity loss. And here it's very important to underline, and this is extremely crucial to bear in mind, that it's not just about the physical health, so the exposure to the heat, but also the implications in terms of mental health. And in that aspect, here it's important to underline then two issues, which I think they are similar but different in a concrete way, and I'll try to explain, which is also the job insecurity and work insecurity. Job insecurity, because some jobs that exist today, they will have to cease to exist, part of the transition, and that obviously creates job insecurity for some people. And then there's also the so-called work insecurity, which is about the fact that many jobs are being transformed in the way that they are organized, the way that they are carried out. The tasks, the roles are changing, and that creates change in the jobs themselves, and that this can create some stress and uncertainty as well. We call it work insecurity. So it's part of the work. Of course, employers here have a very important role. Companies, employers, they have to adapt the jobs and the workplaces to these increased risks. For instance, some of the things that can be done is to increase, and now thinking specifically of the example of the increasing temperatures, to give more frequent breaks to the workers, to change working hours so that people can work in cooler parts of the day, reschedule some tasks, or relocating completely some tasks from outdoors to indoors. So just to give a concrete example, we can think about engineers and technicians that work in the maintenance of our infrastructure. So we need electricity, we need internet, we need water, etc. These workers will most likely have to change the way that they're doing their work when they are exposed, for instance, to extreme weather events. So this creates obviously changes in terms of the way that the work is produced, but also in terms of the job quality that these workers are exposed to.
But I mean, I suppose the never-ending circle, in fact, then, Martina, because we're looking at the creation of green jobs, which is part of our green transition. Then we're looking at what kind of jobs are created there. Then we're looking also at what actually climate change, the impact that climate change is having on the working conditions of existing workers. And then surely there's a whole new industry out there of putting in place measures to adapt to the need to respond to those climate change impacts. So it's sort of an ongoing cycle. What kind of expansion are we seeing there in terms of the initiatives that are being put in place to adapt to the kind of things that George has just been mentioning?
Yes, well, also, to mention also one thing, just to come back to the climate risk very briefly, because Eurofound is its partner of the European Climate and Health Observatory, which is a joint initiative by the European Commission and the EEA, and so we're very happy to have Eurofound on board there. So we also have in our observatory resources related to inequalities in exposure to climate hazards, and we published in 2024. The first European climate risk assessment. So we look at 36 climate risks and how they pose a threat Europe's energy and food security ecosystem infrastructure. And then, of course, there are socioeconomic implications. So I'm very happy, very pleased to hear also about Eurofound research on this. Going back to your question about adaptation, it's spot on. There needs to be a joint effort on the one hand to decarbonize our economy, so to mitigate the climate change, but at the same time we need to adapt somehow. We need to prepare our societies and economies for climate impacts. And this, has a lot of implications, including from unemployment and labor market perspective. If you think, for instance, about infrastructure and construction, so adaptation measures can involve building of flood defenses or coastal barriers or drainage systems. So all these infrastructure work can have associated employment potential. It's also about cooling infrastructure. For instance, if we think about urban planning and cities, our cities are becoming warmer and warmer. So how do we invest in cooling infrastructure like green roofs or public spaces, reflective material and so on. So as well, there's a lot of employment implication there. It's about ecosystem restorations or the so-called nature-based solutions. So if we restore forest, wetlands, or we create urban parks or green corridors, there's some employment potential linked to that as well. So I think this water management as well, and I could keep going for a while, but this is to emphasize that really I think one key message would be that we really need to keep kind of an open mind when it comes to understanding the employment implications of the green transition. So looking at very, very different
so a very clear picture of both risk and opportunity when it comes to this area, which is interesting. And one of the areas that I think is also particularly interesting here is when we talk, Jorge, about competitiveness. And I talked about that earlier on, about how that's a driving force now for the European Union. And President von der Leyen has made that one of the top priorities. But clearly, one of the elements there has been for Europe and indeed other trading partners to look at investing more in digital technologies, and that with digital technologies, we will see ourselves increasing competitiveness, or at least that is the idea behind it. And I suppose at one stage we talked a lot about the twin transition, about the green transition and the digital transition, and we sort of saw them as hand in hand. Is there a danger that, in fact, particularly with the introduction of AI, are we looking at potential risks here also in terms of how the introduction of more digital technologies, AI, etc., could in fact see themselves as an obstacle to Europe achieving its green objectives?
That's a great question, Mary. So I would start by two elements, which then leads to, let's say, looking at the specific impact on jobs and on the so-called green jobs. So first of all, is that we might have some competition for investment. So the fact that there's a growing investment in digital technologies and AI and so on, this might crowd out investment that would otherwise be done in terms of greening, right? So there's a competition there for the money that is put in these different transitions, if you want. And then there's the technical issues as well. So digitalization and AI, they are not necessarily green and clean technologies, right? So it's kind of a bit paradoxical that these technologies can be increase energy demand. They can have a very high resource use. So for instance, if we think about data centers, it's been proven that the energy levels are extremely high, that the use of water are the levels of water use are extremely high to cool down all those machines. And also there's some competition in terms of the raw materials, which are necessary for both transitions. The raw materials that you need for your computers and your microprocessors, etc., some of them are similar to or the same that would be required otherwise for technology, so-called clean technology or green technology. So there's competition from that point of view as well. So only from this side you can see already that they are kind of fighting for resources, money, and raw materials as well. So in terms of jobs, also because I mentioned already the STEM skills earlier, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics. These two transitions will be competing for very similar, if not the same, skills. So we can see already that there are labor shortages in sectors which are important for the greening. So if we think about construction, energy, manufacturing, etc. So if all of a sudden we have digitalization and AI competing for the same skills for the same workers, this will be a sort of a war to some extent for the little available workforce with very important skills and very much in demand at the time. But at the same time, and again, always trying to have a positive view on this, we should hope that digitalization and AI can be used to make green transition more efficient, greener, more sustainable as well. So in the end, it will all depend of the use that we are going to make of AI, for instance, and the process of digitalization. So this idea of twin transition in which green and digital transitions are managed in an harmonious way is extremely important to ensure that the green transition does not slow down on the one hand and does not exacerbate or create further inequalities. So last week we had COP30, which is one of the most important meetings in the planet about our climate objectives. And unfortunately, it was a bit kind of underwhelming, the results of this. So it's a bit concerning in that context that unfortunately digitalization and AI might be crowding out the resources and the ideas that otherwise would be applied to our green transition.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground already today. I'm hoping you'll also be able to send us off when we have this final round, when I would say to you, looking at the opportunities and risks that we have examined a little bit today, if you were to have either, the COP leaders or indeed the EU leaders in a lobby, and you could bend their ear as to what they should do better to ensure that we have clean, good quality green jobs which contribute to greater competitiveness for Europe over the next decade or so, what would you say, George? Talk to me in three.
So I start.
Yes.
Thanks. So my main three points from my side. So first one and top of my list would be job quality. So I would try to convey the best way possible that job quality is a precondition for a resilient and competitive green Europe. So it's something that you need to take care of now in order to ensure a sustainable future. We must monitor job quality of the jobs which are going to be impacted by the climate change and the green transition. We have to monitor the quality of the jobs, the job quality of those jobs that will be created in the future as well. And we have to ensure that they are of good quality. It sounds a little bit like a repetition, but it's really, really top important, because I don't think, and it's becoming more important now, because we are seeing at high level this preoccupation with so for instance through the which is exemplified by the job quality roadmap. Now we will have a quality jobs action as well at European level. So it's becoming more important, but I don't think it's still important across the board for all the agents involved. Second point is support. Focusing on the workers and the people directly impacted by climate change and the green transition, we have to ensure that everybody who is impacted, no matter what, that they get the support they need. Occupations, sectors, regions, as Martina already mentioned as well, we need to ensure that everybody gets the support they need. This includes changes to the work, how work is performed and organized. Small changes sometimes, but important ones, but also training, reskilling, skilling, to ensure that everybody has a place in the world in the next few years. And this is really, really crucial to ensure a successful and just transition. And related to that point, my last point is about involvement and participation. So at Eurofound, very often we talk about social dialogue, collective bargaining, involving social partners. But what is crucial here in this particular aspect of impacts of climate change and green transition is that all actors, workers, employers, their representatives, their communities, and other relevant organizations as well, they should be sitting at the table where the decisions are made. Because social dialogue, which is kind of a tradition between social partners, is important, but it's not enough. We need the social partners plus all those other organizations which represent vulnerable groups, for instance, in our societies, in our communities, to ensure that they have a say in the way that we do and implement this transition. Okay, so this would be for me the 3 points.
So support, training, quality jobs, and then voice, really, participation and voice. So that's 3 core issues, not unrelated to job quality in general, Jorge. So that's good to hear from our side at Eurofound. Martina, in the same lobby or perhaps in the elevator, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I can only echo Jorge takeaways, but perhaps I can also take a different perspective, complementary. Well, first one, because Jorge rightly mentioned in his last intervention the issue of crowding out of investment. Investing in the green transition is not an option, is a must. We need green investment. There is a large annual investment gap, and so we need to boost investments, and we need strong support also from the private sector to do so. And green investment can not only strengthen Europe's competitiveness, boost strategic autonomy, and also stimulate innovation, but at the same time create jobs. But, and that would be the second point, a link to Jorge's reflection as well, it can create jobs, but are we sure that these jobs are of good quality, and are we sure we are supporting a just transition? So there are positive and encouraging developments when it comes to job creation, especially if we look at renewables, but it's job creation and a just transition at the same time. So ideally, one would also like to have some social conditionalities when it comes to funding, so that we create the good quality jobs as well, so that the transition is good at the same time for the environment, but also for the people, jobs, and livelihood. And then perhaps a more general remark, which relates to some of the points that I cover, is that if we look at employment opportunities, we need to perhaps overcome this idea of kind of a narrow idea of green jobs, but really think that there are cross-cutting implications for the entire economy, and there is a job creation potential which is not only linked to decarbonization, but also how we adapt to climate change, how we transition to more circular business models, and so on. So yeah, that would be some of my reflections.
Well, I think, Martina, what I take from you is what you said at the outset. It's a very good way for us to wrap up the discussion today, is that investment in a green transition is not an option, it's a must. And I think from the discussion we had today, that is clear across so many fronts. There's obviously a lot more we could have discussed today also, but this is really just the ongoing collaboration that we have with the EEA on so many topics which are related to the social and economic implications of climate change and the green transition. We look forward to collaborating into the future with you ongoing. You should, of course, if you're interested in what you've heard today, we have a webinar which we had jointly with the EEA, which was recently earlier this year, on Is Europe's Green Transition in Jeopardy? The EEA report on the circular economy is available on their website. And of course, Eurofound and the EEA are also cooperating ongoing on quality jobs in the clean technology sector, and that will be during 2026. So lots more to follow if this is your topic. And indeed, if you're interested in any of the other topics that we've raised today, gender equality, for example, we have a lot of work on our website on that, on job quality, on competitiveness, and indeed on poverty, anti-poverty and inclusion. So many other areas that you can find on our website. You can also follow us on our social media channels. And of course, if you are listening to us on the podcast, which I assume you are, you can find us on Spotify or indeed wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up to our newsletter. We look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, when Eurofound talks to you.